Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kinda Queer podcast, hosted by a couple of kinda queer folks. My name is Ryan, and I am a cis pansexual man.
And hi, I'm Masha, and I'm a lesbian.
Thank you for joining me today, Masha.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. So I guess the first question I have for you is, how did you know that you were queer, and when did you come to identify with the lesbian label?
So when I was in around 9th grade, I just started thinking, wow, so many things about me would just make so much more sense if I was gay.
Uh-huh.
And for months I was like, isn't that crazy for a straight person? That's hilarious. I was like, who I'd have a crush on if I was gay? This person. And
Uh-huh.
and I know exactly how I would feel about her if I did have a crush on her. And then literally just one day I was sitting and I was like, oh my God, that's gay. And I originally identified as bisexual because I did have I'm trying to explain I had crushes on men. They registered in my mind as crushes.
Yeah.
And at the, it's difficult for me to say that oh no, those weren't valid. Those were comp het or whatever. Those were different. But I just haven't been attracted to men and since then basically.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, basically it's my attraction to men, or let's say my crushes on men were always kind of different from my crushes on women.
Mm-hmm.
And basically at some point I was just okay, that is an attraction. That's just something else.
Yeah.
That isn't enough to be included in my sexuality. But at the time I was yeah, this is significant enough to be included in my sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even so much that I sort of realized that, oh no, this wasn't real. It was just that I was okay, this is actually not sexuality relevant.
When did you, or do you remember when you finally were no, this isn't, I'm not bisexual, I think I'm just lesbian?
I mean, it was kind of a gradual process because I would just be thinking oh, haven't had a crush on a man in a while, and then I did start thinking about men. I was okay, well, what do I think about men?
Uh-huh.
And I was yeah, not much. So it really was a gradual process. It was just, I sort of realized that, what was once present was now absent.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a grand realization, the thing where I was, sitting in a classroom oh my God,
Yeah.
I am gay. It was really just the gradual process.
So I have a very, very serious question for you, because I believe most gay people have done this. Did you ever take any of those stupid online quizzes to am I gay?
Honestly, not as a serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
The last couple of weeks I've been taking a bunch of personality quizzes and then just judging them mercilessly. Personality. So kind of in that same vein. But the thing is, the questions on those quizzes are, I mean, either the BuzzFeed quizzes are do you listen to Girl in Red? And it's okay, thanks. I was saying, I didn't really take any of those quizzes seriously because either they'd be something that's how are you into gay culture?
Yeah.
And that's more oh, do you have gay friends? And
Mm-hmm.
the other people oh, so have you had crushes on girls? And I'm well, if I had known that, I wouldn't need to take this quiz to figure it out.
Yeah, most of the quizzes are just do you think you're gay? It's well, that's what I'm asking you, but...
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing I have to ask you, are you able to sit properly ever?
I'm not sitting properly right now.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I ordered myself a footstool so I could put my feet up onto it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right now, just when I'm sitting at my desk, when you don't know what to do with your hands when you're talking to someone, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're just all over the place. No, I cannot sit properly.
Perfect. I think that is something that my current assumed presumption is that all gay people have in common, and I've yet to find a single person who's not like that.
Yeah, I mean, partially it's probably just signaling that people know that, partially, I mean, if honestly, do you have a straight people control group? Because maybe we just need to redesign chairs, you know? Like, maybe chairs are poorly designed.
Yeah, let's get a bunch of straight people together and have them all sit in chairs and see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan using the scientific method.
Yes, yes, of course. So do you have any specific childhood stories that when you look back on them now, you just think to yourself, how did I not know?
You know, honestly, no. Like there are some funny things. Like so at the very exciting event of my preschool graduation, we all made little caps that we could decorate.
Uh-huh.
And what I decorated mine with was two guys and two girls holding hands, and there
Uh-huh.
was a rainbow over all of them.
Ah,
And like like it looks ridiculous now, like just how much that fits the iconography of
uh-huh.
gayness. But at the time it was honestly like it was the most het thing I could think of, because I was like, oh, you know, like, no, guys and girls can't be friends. That's why the two guys were holding hands and the two girls were
Yes.
holding hands. Even though like I was friends with guys. But like also, you know, I was actually like I had like the guy friends, and I was like, which one of them will be my husband in the future? But yeah. Additionally, for example, my very dear friend told me that we should get married. Like, this is a female friend told me that we
Mm-hmm.
should get married if we don't find anyone by, I think she said like age 30. Like, it was a really low number.
Uh-huh.
He was like, you know, once we're old hags. We were like, eight. Once we're old hags, you know, if we haven't found anybody, we should get married. And I was like, you silly Billy, like, I've never said that before in my life. But I was like, yeah, like, you know, women can't get married. And I
Yeah.
like that. I remember that to this day, even though it was like a passing moment. But I was like when I was coming out, I was like, do you remember when you said to me that, you know, we could get married? Like,
Uh-huh.
we could actually do that. Like,
It's like I'm still down if you're down. It's okay. Yeah, no, that's great. There's some like things from my childhood which like they didn't technically say that I was gay because nothing is like, oh well, this is gay. It's like, no, anyone could do it. But like they're just things that like you look back on them and I'm just like, wow, wow. Like I would dance around in my house like in just my underwear and cowboy boots because that's what you do.
yeah, I don't know. Like, I just, if we're talking about sexuality, like, I don't really think like I had a sexuality as a child. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, you know, like, definitely not like a directed sexuality where I was like,
Yeah.
this is the person that I want to do sexual things with. And we're talking about gender. Like, it's difficult to say because like gender bending for girls was kind of like popular at the time,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of, you know, like there was such a concept as a girly girl, and you didn't want to be that.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I was like, oh no, I'm not a girly girl, like, is that because of like some innate sense of gender, or is it because that was literally what the social pressure was at the time? Like,
Yeah.
the socially accepted role for girls on the playground was tomboy. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not like and like I also wasn't that much of a tomboy, you know. Like,
Uh-huh.
I was really standard girl, so to speak. A thing that exists, you know, standard girl.
I can see that on a movie poster. Standard Girl.
Yeah,
Very exciting movie. I think everyone would want to watch it.
yeah, certainly.
So have you come out to other people, and if you have, how has that been for you? Did you have positive experiences, bad ones?
Honestly, like, it's been overall really positive. When I was coming out, I was like 14.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was spending a decent amount of time on the internet, and, you know, people were like, why do gay people need to come out? You know, straight people don't need to come out. And I was like, that's such a good point. I'm just not going to come out to like my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my various friends, because, like, you know, we would be talking about like relationships and crushes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, guys, you know how I was talking about this girl like every single day for the last year and a half? And they were like, yes. And I was like, okay, like, guess what that was about. You know.
Yeah.
But you know, because like, but that made sense in context. And to my parents, I was like, they'll figure it out. Or rather, I was like, I'm gonna bring home a girl, and they're gonna be like, oh, okay. And this plan was foiled by the fact that I did not obtain a girlfriend. I had really high confidence. I was like, oh well, now that I'm gay, like,
Yeah.
But it was kind of like obvious. Yeah, so with regards to like, I actually, like, I mean, full credit to my mother. that she's been like very good about it. Like her mother used to tell her, and now she says to me whenever I like ask for something, she'd be like, "You'll grow up, marry a rich man, and he'll buy you your ice cream or whatever." And now she's like, "Oh, I'll be like, Mom, like, can I have ice cream?" And she'll be like, "You'll grow up, marry a rich woman, and she'll buy you ice cream." My dad is a Soviet man. Like, he definitely like it's not that I'm offended at anything he says. I'm just like, do you think with your head or no? Yeah, to his credit, basically, like, I'm really interested in the academic aspect of queerness, and my dad is also very much, like an academic at heart. So I'll, like, when I'm like, "Yo, I'm gay," he's like, like, weird, but whatever. But when I'm like, "Hey, want to hear like what gender actually is?" He's like really engages with the material, so to speak. Like, I'll be talking to him on the phone, and I'll be like, "Yeah, like, and this is the reason why you too are probably gay." And he's like, "Tracks." And I'll be like, "Anyway, like, remember how I'm gay?" And he's like, I'm over exaggerating a little bit, honestly. Like, like, yes, he's weird about it, but like in a accepting way, so to speak. Like, he'll make like weird jokes about lesbians that do not make any sense, and I'm more offended at how unfunny they are than like the actual content. He'll be like, "Oh, but like, I'm doing this because I accept you as a lesbian, which is why I'm like making jokes about you as a lesbian and not about like anything else." I'm not sure that's like, quite the beacon of acceptance you need it to be, but it's, like, it's fine.
Sorry, I feel like that's how dads do it, they gotta joke about things.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, like, people that I've been worried that it'll change my relationship to, I haven't come out to. Like, I'm Russian and I'm fairly active in the Russian community. And, like, I'm not out to most Russian people.
Yeah.
And also, it like, Soviet and post-Soviet gender dynamics are pretty different. So if you actually, like, speak to a Soviet person for some time, you'll notice that they are kind of homoerotic. Like, first of all, the culture is kind of less puritanical than it is here with relationship to sex. So people just show appreciation for, like, the bodies of their own sex or gender in ways that here would be considered like sexual, but there was not. And so that really comes off as gay. Like, sometimes my parents will be like, "Oh," like, they'll say something, they'll be like, "Oh, isn't that person like so beautiful?" And I'm like, are you gay? Like, what is that?" But and in general, like, the women were worked outside of the home much more, and did sort of quote unquote masculine roles. So a lot of the times, and a lot of the styles literally just look gay. Like, my friends were all like fully convinced that my aunt was gay, and she's not. And like, whenever my mom and my aunt are out together in public, it's just like, looking at them from like a distance, I'm like, "Oh my god, they look like a lesbian couple." All this to say is that it's a little easier maybe to be undercover, so to speak, even without like actually changing anything about the presentation.
Yeah.
Because that's just like what everybody looks and acts like. But yeah, I'm not sure like who has suspicions and who doesn't. But if I don't know, if I ever get married, I guess I'll invite those people and be like, "Hey, like, if you want the wedding cake, you're gonna have to come."
Yeah.
Or I'll be like, "This is my wife," and they'll be like, "Wait a second."
There are still quite a decent amount of people that I'm not out to, including my dad. And like, I think there are some people, it's weird because there's some people that I know if I told them, literally nothing would change and it wouldn't matter to them at all. And yet I still haven't told them. And I don't really know why. I don't know. I think it's really weird. Like, it just feels like something would be off if I said it. And I don't know if it's because, like, we're such good friends that I feel like it would somehow throw off like the dynamic, but I don't know, because in fact one of them is in fact gay, so I literally, it's like, yeah, he would accept me, but why haven't I told him? I don't know.
I mean, one of the things that for me is, as I said, I was coming out in the 9th grade, so like 14, 15. And you know how you just hate everyone when you're 14?
Yes.
I don't want to, like, I actually, I'm cautious of playing into sort of age tropes, but like I did not have a particularly good relationship with the adults in my life at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like some of them I did, but like, you know, I was really apathetic about towards what my parents thought about me. I was like, I really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I was like, if they hate that I'm gay, like whatever. So I actually think I might have had more trouble coming out like today.
Yeah.
Um, because like now I have a better relationship with my parents, and like
Mm-hmm.
I would be worried that something would like that would throw it off.
Yeah.
But so that might be why it's difficult for you to come out to certain people where you're like, you know, we have a good relationship,
Yeah.
going well as it's going. I don't want to introduce a new variable to the mix. But in terms of people who, you know, you want to come out to, but or like you know that you know would accept you. Maybe I don't know, like try discussing gay things. Like
Uh-huh.
if it's like two gay people speaking to each other, like it might change like with that friend that you mentioned. Like
Yeah.
I guess it could change the dynamic, but if you like try, I guess like interacting as a gay, so to speak, and see if that like if you're talking about like that without necessarily coming out,
Mm-hmm.
like it might sort of give you like an idea of what the dynamic will be like, and you can
Yeah.
also be like, hey, like I really don't want this to change the dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I to a degree I feel like I've kind of done that like in some ways just because I don't know I don't the thing is I guess I don't even really care that much if they do find out because it's like whatever but like there have been times where like they themselves have like questioned like my sexuality and I've just been like oh all right and like there have been times where like I've like said things in like a joking manner, but it was kind of real. And so it's like I feel like they probably definitely have suspicions, but I just haven't like confirmed it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that like, you know, sexuality and gender are really not rational things.
No.
And so the, you know, even if you have every logical reason to, you know, come out or to take basically any action that's
Mhm.
your sexuality or your gender or any of the things in that orbit, it might not actually correspond with what you want to do or what you need to do.
Mhm.
So like if it's bothering you that you're not able to come out to people, like it might help to make a checklist of here's all the reasons why I should versus here are the fewer reasons that I shouldn't.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, person by person, like here are the reasons why I should, here are the reasons why I shouldn't. If there are more reasons that I should,
Mhm.
I'll go for it. But if you're, I mean, if you're not worried about it, there's definitely, I think, as especially as queerness has come into the sort of the more mainstream culture,
Yeah.
there's become more of like a narrative for, you know, what a queer person is, which is
Mhm.
like exactly the opposite of what queerness is about.
Yes.
So because of that, there's sort of like this pressure of like, you know, like there's like queer life stages that you're supposed to go through at like
Mhm.
a certain pace, and it's like kind of similar as to like the het life pressures of like, you know, find a person to get married
Yeah.
to of the quote opposite gender, and you know, have a child with them, get married, etc., etc. And similarly, it's like, oh, find out that you're gay, come
Mhm.
out, like enter the
Mhm.
dating scene type of thing. Like, you know, if you think that the het life pressures are like not good, you can apply that to the gay life pressures as well. Like, there's no pressure, there's no need to follow that specific life path.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too because around high school, because I basically discovered that I was queer in middle school. So like in high school, there was just like a long period of time where I was like, you know, I don't really care that I'm not out to people because it doesn't change anything.
Mm-hmm.
And me saying that I'm queer wouldn't change anything about me because I'm still Ryan. So I think now I've kind of brought that like forward to today where it's like, you know, I still don't care. Like if people know that I'm queer, if they don't, it doesn't change like who I am.
Well, that's the thing, because you know, straight people don't have to come out.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, being gay, like, doesn't need to fundamentally change anything about how the rest of the world interacts with you if you don't want it to.
Mhm.
Like, you know, like some people will choose to signal basically, like, you know, when people are like, oh, I have crazy gaydar, and it's like, yeah, that person is wearing 3 stacked flannels, like they want you to be able to tell.
Yeah.
Like, you know, my hair is short. I had a dream yesterday that my hair grew out long. I needed to cut it.
Mm-hmm.
My subconscious is sending me clear messages. I really do look like an overgrown dog right now. But and like when I was cutting my hair short, like I actually, one of my friends did it in a dorm, and then I went to get it trimmed up. But I was like, you know, like, yeah, give me the lesbian haircut.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know what I was, you know, what I intended to do, and like I dress in a way that I consider gay, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So like for me, I kind of do want people to sort of like look at me and think like, she's probably a homo, you know?
Yeah.
But that's obviously not going to be true for everybody. And so, you know, for me, like coming out to people is like, yeah, like I want you to think of me as gay. And like, if that changes how you interact with me, like, good, I want you to change in that direction.
Yeah.
But if not, then like, it's basically like, those are two morally equivalent things. You're just shaping how the world is going to interact with you based off of whether or not you come out and how you present yourself. And it's not like one of those things is better or morally more good than the other one.
Yeah, there's some days where I wake up and like I know I have to like go out and do things and I just choose to be gay. like I open my closet and I'm like, yep, this is the most gay thing I could wear today, so I'm gonna wear it. And then like I also have like fake earrings because I haven't actually gotten my ears pierced, and I'll just be like, yep, wearing those today too.
Are fake earrings comfortable? Because I also don't have my ears pierced, but sometimes I also, and like I feel like I would simply not have the focus to like make sure they don't get infected.
Yeah. I like me personally, I haven't had any issue with them. Like basically like there's some that are like magnets and there's some that just kind of like clamp on your ear, and you'll feel it for like a little while, and then like after you continue wearing them, like you just stop noticing that they're there. So they're pretty good. I just ordered like a pack of them off of Amazon. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it.
You should have a little section at the end of each episode where it's just like fashion advice with Ryan. Information.
Yeah, well, I don't have the best fashion sense, but you know, yes. So yeah, I would recommend fake earrings. They're pretty good.
All right, well, there's the first fashion tip.
There's my very first fashion tip, quite possibly the last, but so take it very, you know, imbue it into yourself. Make sure you really feel it, and that's, yeah.
My fashion tip of the day is forget everything you learned about the color wheel and what colors look good together, and simply put the most garish possible color combinations on.
Nice. So, before you mentioned that you were Russian, and you also said that you were bicultural. So how has being bicultural affected your queerness or your person, if at all?
I mean, I am very much, like, identify really strongly with my Russian identity. What's funny is that I'm also Jewish, and so, like, the Russians are the people who, like, erased my ancestral culture and everything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, like, a weird situation. I'm like, am I, like, betraying the Jews? So it's weird, but my parents, you know, obviously were Russian, and they identified as Russians, and I did not identify as basically anything but Russian. Like solidly into high school. Like I started identifying as an American only like junior year of high school. I've lived here my entire life, so it's ridiculous that I didn't identify as American beforehand. But because I always felt myself to be like different from normal Americans, so to speak, and I definitely had a superiority complex over it. I was like, you and you monolinguals, I speak 2 languages. Like, you and you monoculturals, I have 2 cultures. And then I started work with a Russian company, and like the couple was from Russia, and I was like, oh, we are not the same. Like,
yeah.
You know, I was like, okay, like now I understand. And my job in that company was basically to be an American, because they'd be like, oh, like, you know, this is what we did for advertising. We ordered, you know, we spent like $500 on a Google ad, and I was like, nobody looks at Google ads. Like,
Yeah.
obviously. And they'd be like, oh, we did this. And I'd be like, well, nobody does that, obviously. And I was like, well, where are these obviously's coming from? They're coming from the fact that I've lived in America my entire life and
Yeah.
like have an innate understanding of the culture. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an American. Which I was like, but yeah, that was that. And I also, I as I said, I never really identified as Jewish either. Like, you know, because like, basically the best way to explain this is that like, I mean, I knew from birth that I was Russian because, or not, you know, as soon as I was able to understand the concept of identity, I knew that I was Russian because we spoke a different language at home that was spoken in the grocery store, for example.
Yeah.
Like I could read the stuff that was inside our house, and I could only read like 50% of what was outside of our house because the Russian alphabet shares a lot of similarities with the Latin alphabet for those people. Like that was instantly clear, but we didn't do Jewish things, so like there's no like, you know, I wasn't like, oh. I'm trying to think of like an equivalent. Like we didn't speak Hebrew. We didn't do any sort of like Jewish cultural things. The, you know, holidays that we celebrated were based, like we celebrated New Year's instead of any other winter holiday because that's how they did it in the Soviet times. So like the fact that we were Jewish like had to be explained to me in a way that the fact that we were Russian was simply immediately self-evident. And yeah, all this to say is that, you know, not every second-gen immigrant will have this experience, but I identify really strongly with my parents' culture. And this actually, like, probably the thing that I'm most grateful to my parents to in terms of, like, their decisions making in raising us was that they really put in a lot of effort to make sure we, like, preserve the language. So I went to language classes, like a kind of like a literature circle type of thing, since I was like basically from the time I was 3 to the time I was 18. So it was like a very huge portion of my life.
Yeah.
I'm very, very grateful to that woman, you know, and like all of my friends as a child, like my earliest American friend that like you know, went over to my house and like I actively invited and that I'm still in contact with, I made in 5th grade. So like, and you know, it was so funny. So all of my birthday, apparently, I didn't even realize this, but all of my birthday parties until then had apparently been Russians only. And because Russians are late to everything. And this is just like, this is the expectation. So like when you say 6, like you really mean like at least 6:30, and more realistically 7. And this, yeah. And so, you know, I said 6, and I meant like, you know, 6:45 because it's a long party, so that like also affects how late you should come. And he showed up like at 6, and I was like, literally, what are you doing here? Like my mom was in the shower, I was still doing the dishes, like half the food wasn't even in the oven yet, type of thing. And we were like deer in headlights, like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And thankfully they lived in our neighborhood, and they still do actually, but so they just left back to the house.
That's funny.
Anyway, the point is that like all this, I'm saying all this to explain that I've sort of been very deeply enmeshed in Russian culture, and really in Russian American culture. Like it is filtered through the lens of Americanism, and it is filtered through the lens of immigration. Like it's it's partially Russian, partially American, and largely like the identity is just the diaspora. Like I have a lot of experiences in common with second-gen immigrants from like literally whichever culture in the world. So to some degree, diaspora is the identity. And how this affects gender and sexuality, like, I mean, here's an example. Like, imagine you come from a culture where women are the like primary providers, so to speak. Like they're the ones who work outside of the home. They're the ones who, I don't know, do the hunting as opposed to the gathering or whatever. Like they're the ones who sort of like are the breadwinners. And then you come to like 1950s America where it's the exact opposite. Like surely you're going to have some sort of difficulty identifying with women, so to speak. But society will be like, no, you're a woman. But you identify strongly with the provider role, and the closest thing to that is a man. Like, so would you start identifying as trans because of that? So, you know, similarly, like there isn't such a drastic difference between Russian and American culture, but as I mentioned before, like the gender politics were pretty different. And so, like, it's not like as a child I was like, oh, like I feel this like disconnect from womanhood or whatever, that it's like because of my Russianness. But I think that like to some degree, like the gender politics that are sort of in my mind
Mm-hmm.
isn't purely American gender politics, you know?
Yeah.
So when I think about like, oh, what's the type of life that I want to lead?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, like maybe if I lived in the Soviet Union in the 1980s, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what woman is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, while here, that's not really the case.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's literally so difficult to explain gender without being like without fully falling into gender stereotypes. So
Yeah.
it's really difficult to explain why this is. The other thing is that like I've never been to Russia and I really want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And like this sort of like ancestral longing for my homeland that I feel like my family's been in Moscow for like 3 generations. And before that they lived in like border towns on the shtetl. Like we could have ended up in basically like any of 5 countries because Jews were resigned to the border shtetl, but we
Yeah.
ended up here and I'm like, yes, Siberia, that's my country. um but that like sort of like longing has a gendered tinge to it for me because
Mm-hmm.
things were just different in a way that like it's just I don't know, this is literally so difficult to explain. I went through this in my head several times so I would be able to explain it to you, but like I just feel like my longing for Mother Russia, so to speak, this is so ridiculous. Like I feel like I'm a nationalist. I'm embarrassed. Like it physically feels the same as my longing for a different gendered experience.
Uh-huh.
And like it should also be said that like all #women, I feel like an innate sense of distrust to like random men. Like
Yeah.
I'm skeptical of like if there's a random guy on the street, I'm gonna be like, no, who are you? But
Mm-hmm.
like if it's a Russian man, I'm completely fine. Like, I'm just like, oh my god, like yeah, you're one of us, like, whatever, like literally I'll give you my address, come over to my house with me. Like I know I can like literally smell the alcohol on your breath through like, our masks, and you're like saying weird things, but like yeah,
Uh-huh.
whatever. Like and my mom's like, what are you doing? Like that's a man. And I'm like, no, that's a Russian man. Like they're different.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually something that a lot of Russian girls that I've talked to do experience, where they're like, yeah, like Russian man and man are not the same thing. Yeah, my point is that like in many ways the culture does shape how I see gender, and it's not even so much like any innate aspects of Russianness.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the diaspora aspect of it. It's
Yeah.
like in terms of how like you identify like in group and out group,
Mm-hmm.
like it's different for Russian men than it is for American men.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of like how you see the trajectory of a feminine life versus a masculine life, it's different. And in terms of like, because like when I hear like the stories of the Soviet times, that I'm like, I wish my life was like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're generally quote unquote masculine. They have to do with like a sort of independence and like specific type of experience that is partially gendered masculine here and partially was gendered masculine in the Soviet Union, and was also just like opening up to women. Like for example, I think playing guitar is like one of the most masculine things ever, and that's ridiculous because like everybody plays, like everybody in
Yeah.
I play guitar. I know like 10 women who play guitar, like, and they're like in my friend group, like so that's
Uh-huh.
all the women. But like it still has that masculine associations from kind of like before my parents were growing up that were carried over.
Yeah.
So like because the people that influenced my perception of Russia were leaving kind of like as the sort of like gender politics were changing again, some of the experiences of the women were still considered masculine.
Mm.
So a lot of these experiences I feel like are masculine. So when I'm like, like I wish I could like go to Russia and live in Russia, which is like it's a terrible place for gays and it's getting increasingly worse.
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, what if I was a straight man in Russia? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so like they're kind of like they're so enmeshed, and I didn't even realize this at first, but they're the same thing. And I feel like I've monologued for like 15 minutes at this point, so I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I feel like, I definitely feel like I kind of grew up with a different understanding of gender too. And it wasn't so much just because of like the culture that I'm a part of. It was more so like like my mom has an enormous influence over who I am today,
Mhm.
and I grew up and my mom was always a hard worker. Like she like both my dad and my mom like worked like full time jobs, and so in my eyes it wasn't like, well, one gender has to, go out and get all the money for the household, and the other has to like stay and watch the kids. It was like, no, anyone can do anything that they want. And so, like, when I grew up, I was just like, I guess the way that I saw things is just, I don't really care who you are, what you identify as, your sexuality or anything like that. It was just like, they're doing their own thing, that doesn't hurt anyone. And so it's basically just like I kind of like I definitely grew up with some of the stereotypes like in my own head, because I think that's just going to happen. But there were a lot less of them that
Mhm.
I believed, and so I was like, I don't know, it's just a lot different, and I can slightly relate to the like the coming from like a different culture and immigrant family, because like I'm not a second generation, but I like my great grandparents, like they came on my dad's side. They came over from Poland, and they all worked in like a small like village in America, in like a mill town. And so like I'm very interested in like that culture and everything.
Mhm.
And on my dad's side, they came over from Ireland, and so I kind of got like a unique look at how different cultures kind of like mix and influence things. And so it's always been interesting to see for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that really is the thing, right? That gender is not separable from the social
Hmm.
context in which it is the social context in which it is. It's an
Yeah,
acceptable like social role that is assigned to you based off of, I mean, right now off of sex, right?
yeah,
And if it's a social role in a society, so
yeah,
not to be like we live in a society, but um, the society that you live in is obviously going to assign you different roles. So
yeah.
if you come from like, so you could come from like, two different societies, like two different cultures, right?
Hmm.
And they might be assigning you slightly different roles. That'll probably like that'll impact it. I was gonna say like that'll confuse you, but that's not what I meant. That'll impact how you see it. And if you come from like, the large society of America and then the smaller society of your family,
Hmm.
and they have different norms and they're assigning you different roles,
Yeah,
like, yeah, of course that'll impact how you see your gender. Like, this is actually, I feel like this is a really intuitive idea. Like, like culture affects your gender
hmm,
is like, it's almost obvious.
yeah,
But it's not something that I think is frequently discussed. And I think it's something that I'm potentially a lot of queer immigrants might relate to.
hmm,
Like, I've started having like talking to my various immigrant friends about it. But it's something that's like not usually like considered like a factor,
yeah,
in sexuality, which or in gender rather, which
hmm,
which I think is really interesting. Like, I think people sort of like, because people are like, oh, like gender is this like innate thing,
hmm,
and it's like, well, like, yeah, like, I mean, in the same way that like your sense of self, so to speak, is an innate thing, but it's
yeah,
not like it's not influenced by the things around it. Um,
yeah,
like, I don't feel like I am the gender that I am because I am like some sort of
hmm,
like, um, Old Testament God stuff. Like, I can kind of like see the things that impact. Some of them I don't see, but like you can, like, things are being put into it. It's not like it's self spawning.
hmm,
And I think that sometimes like transphobes will be like, oh, like, well, you're just like, you think you're a woman because like you think so, and it's like, yeah, like, why do you think you're a woman? Like,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, that is how
exactly.
it works. But it's not like because nothing. It's because of a specific like array of factors. Like,
Hmm.
some of them might be biological. For some people, it might be purely social. Like, they've combined into this like, like understanding of themselves that best aligns with the label woman. Like,
Yeah,
that's also how it happens for cis people. And except with maybe like that aligns more with the social role they were assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like these arguments about like, oh, is gender something that is just like innate in yourself, or is it like something that is cultural, or something that biological? And it's like those three things are the same thing, like you can't separate the self from your culture. You can't separate the self from biology unless you believe in some sort of like Cartesian duality of the body and the soul or whatever. But like these are all one and the same. So like people are like, oh, you just like think that you're that gender? Like, yeah.
Yes, I do actually. Thank you for noticing. Yeah, no, I think it's actually interesting because my grandma, who is Polish, she's told me about how like basically like my grandpa, who is of a different culture, like when they were dating and when they eventually got married, like it was very like weird for my grandma because in her culture she wasn't like quote unquote supposed to like do all these different things, and so like when my grandpa just like kind of expected her to like do the cooking and all that, my grandma was like, what
well, that's like even for like fully cis people, so this is like it's a thing. So there's like I mean I've said this like several times already, but that different cultures have different expectations based around gender, and for some people that just make like that might just be a funny marriage story, while for some people that might be like the major things that does actually shape their gender perception and gender identity. So like I mean I don't know, I just think it's interesting to think about like what aspects of society are really what affect the gender presentation, because like I'm saying gender presentation as opposed to gender identity to sort of like be more encompassing to people for whom that might not sort of, so that we can understand that it's the same process. It's not like, oh, like being bicultural is gonna trans your gender. It's I wish it did, but it's more that like being bicultural will affect your gender in some way, and this might manifest itself as transness. It might manifest itself as gender nonconformity. It might manifest itself as like extreme conformity to one set of gender standards that'll look nonconforming to another culture. But it's we live in a society. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's true. We do live in a society.
Isn't that crazy?
Also, I guess since we're like talking about gender and all of that, how do you view the relationship between gender and sexuality itself?
So fundamentally I think that they're connected, much in the same way that culture and sex or gender are connected. I might be able to explain this more concisely, but like listeners, do not hold your breaths by conciseness. I started thinking about this because it's really difficult for me to explain why I'm attracted to women and not men. Like, there's just, like, is it the physical characteristics? But, like, no. Like, I mean, there's, like I look at men and I'm like, yeah, like, that's an attractive man, so to speak. And, like, I also know, like, some, like, I've known trans women at different stages in their transitions. And, like, once they come out to me as women, even if they're, like, presenting as men to the rest of the world, I'm like, okay, nice. Like, 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 now I'm like, okay, that's a woman. Like, that's fair game. That's like the most dehumanizing way I could have possibly said that. And like, similarly with trans men, where I'm like, they're like, I'm men, and like they literally like they still look like women, and they're still like presenting as women, and everyone sees them as women, but they've come out to me as a man, and I'm like, okay, like never mind. Like, so it's clearly like it clearly it has pretty little to do with physical characteristics, and so it's almost like, and like as with like similarly it's partially to do with social role, but as again with the example with like trans people in various stages of transition, it's like from the very first stage of transition, it's like they register my, like I feel like the way I'm saying this, it makes it sound like everybody I meet automatically registers my mind as either an available sexual partner or not, and this is like not at all true, but the point is, it's like if I was to like go through like a list of my friends, and it's like, who of these people could I theoretically be attracted to? Like, which like I okay, so I'm really undercutting my conciseness here with having to explain that like I really feel like I'm dehumanizing
No,
every
no,
single
you're
thing right
fine.
now.
I get it. I get it.
But anyway, so the point is that like it almost seems like the self identity is what I like what is attractive to me.
Mm-hmm.
So why so? What I eventually realized is that it's not so much like the individual gender, so to speak, of the person that I'm attracted to,
Mm-hmm.
but rather the social dynamic that it creates. Like
Yeah.
being a woman in a relationship with another woman is kind of like a very different social and interpersonal dynamic than being a woman in a relationship with another man.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like I have a lot of guy friends that I think are physically attractive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think they're awesome. I think they're great. And I feel towards them in like much the same way that I do towards like my female friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel towards them very intensely, but it never morphs into anything else. And I think the reason that this is because I'm not interested in being a woman in a relationship with a man, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
So it also should be noted that, so as I said, I was kind of like attracted to men at one point in time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have the phase.
Yes, of course, the phase.
But when I was attracted to men, I was also really femme presenting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wore like femme business casual basically in middle school, and that's what it was because it was literally just my mom's stuff.
Uh-huh.
My mom would be like, "Where's my skirt?" And I'd be like, "Who knows?" Wearing it right now.
Uh-huh.
But you know, and sort of as that fell away, so too did my desire to like, you know, find my place as a woman, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, there really are a lot of things like associated with girlhood that are kind of like you need to process through them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and because of that, like I felt like I needed to identify with the female identity, so to speak, and I like to be like a political woman, like a, you know, to sort of like identify with like women as a class almost, which is partially not how I see gender now, and partially like once I processed that stuff, like it didn't really become important to my gender identity anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like because again, I really don't want this to be seen as a thing where I'm like, oh, being a girl is like girlhood is what makes you a woman. That's like literally the exact opposite of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Once that processed, it was no longer important to my gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, like it's like, okay, like I don't have like being a woman is not about like life being difficult for you. So I sort of stopped feeling like I wanted to have those experiences, basically. Like I stopped being like, I want to experience the world as a feminine woman.
Yeah.
Now I want to experience the world as like a lesbian.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, and like maybe in the future, like when I think about my future, I don't always necessarily think about it as like, because like right now I present as a woman, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
I use like she, her and stuff like that. People think about me as a woman. I like when I think about like if I was to choose one of the binary genders, right? I guess I would say woman. Though I would really resent being forced to make the choice,
Yeah.
in which I in fact am every single day. You know, because that's how our society
Uh-huh.
functions. But like I don't necessarily think like, oh, like I think I'm going to be a woman for my entire life. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, I think like at some point I will be like, you know, because like in my teen years I was like, okay, I've had like the sort of all the feminine like femme experiences that I want.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to move on to sort of like a more like androgynous,
Mm-hmm.
you know, still like woman gender experience. So it's possible that I'll move like again in a different direction, and it's possible that my sexuality will change with that as well.
Yeah.
So my point is that for me personally, like my sexuality is my gender, basically. Like, you know, at the beginning I didn't introduce myself as like a cis woman. I specifically said lesbian because like that's both of them are that thing, right?
Yeah.
Like because if gender is a social role, as I said before, being a woman in a relationship with another woman is its own social role. It's like maybe nowadays those sort of like are becoming more integrated with the like, you know, the straight life.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at like the 50s, like the butch femme culture, for example, like the bar
Yeah.
culture. I mean, it was absolutely not the same thing. I mean, like if people would say like you're not a woman, you're a dyke, like
Mm-hmm.
you know, or like you know, like and certainly like gay men were not perceived as men, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like like, yeah, the fact that they were like assigned male or female at birth and were presenting as like gender non-conforming men or women, as which some of them were not, by the way. Some of them were specifically like they identified as like neither man nor woman. So the point is that yes, a lot of like members of society, like police, would see them as like their assigned birth gender. Like, you know, they'd go to jail in like this jail of their assigned birth gender.
Yeah.
Like, but they were treated just completely differently, right? Like than like a straight woman or like a straight man. Like, and not only was this things that people would say to them, they'd be like, "You're not a real woman. You're not a real man." But they themselves were like, "Yeah, I'm not a woman. I'm a dyke," you know. And like, I was reading this book. It's like a compendium. What is the word I'm looking for? Anthology of texts about butchness and feminists, and it's called The Butch Femme Reader, and it's compiled by Joan Nessel, who herself identifies as a femme. When she was describing like the sort of backlash around butch and femme that happened in the 60s when they were like, oh, when you know, the sort of next generation of lesbians were like, you're role playing straightness, and they'd be like, oh, you know, you femmes, like, you're just like playing into gender stereotypes. And she was like, we weren't women, we were femmes. Like, so even though like this presentation could be like the same, where it's like, you know, you're presenting like feminine, right? She was like, but we were not presenting as women, we were presenting as femmes, we were identifying as femmes. We did not think of ourselves as being women in the traditional sense. And I thought that was really interesting because, like, for them, again, like, the gender was their sexuality, and not just because that's how they were perceived by the rest of the world, but because that was how they actively identified. And if you look across history, like historically, this is actually very common, is that, like, a lot of these, like, quote-unquote third gender roles would be both a gender and a sexual role. And because of that, if you ever look through, like, glossaries of words, they'll sometimes have a word that's translated as gay man, semicolon, trans woman. Like, what does that mean? What it means is that like, Western lexicographer came in and said, like, oh, this person fulfills both a non-standard gender role and a non-standard sexual role. And so that's what they coded that in as gay man, semicolon, trans woman. But what it really means is that, like, the gender and their sexuality basically informed each other, and they didn't just inform each other, they were one and the same.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You made me realize something that I guess never really thought about, which is like, I am pansexual, so I'm attracted to all genders, but like, for me, like, just, I always, like, I don't fantasize so much. Well, that's a weird way to put it, but whatever.
No, I know. It's literally so difficult to explain sexuality without making it sound like you're just, like, literally constantly thinking about everyone you know in a sexual way.
I don't fantasize about, like, being in a heterosexual relationship, like me with a woman. I always, like, whenever it happens, it's like I picture myself with another guy, and, like, to me it's just like the idea of, like, me dating a guy is so much more interesting and compelling to me than me dating a woman, even though I do find both attractive, and, like, I would be in a relationship with a woman. I definitely feel more strongly connected to, like, the gay relationship, or I don't know, just being in a relationship with either a man or like a non-binary person or an androgynous person, as opposed to just being in a relationship with a woman, which is something that I've never, like, really thought about in that way before. Like, I always knew I had a preference toward men, but I never thought about it in that way before.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's not just that, like, you're attracted to, you know, like, a gender or a person. You're also attracted to how those people perceive you.
Yeah.
So when I think of, like, oh, this is, because, like, you know, like, I love my friends very deeply. Like, it's not like, I don't feel like, oh, I, like, when I have a crush on someone, I'm not like, oh, I think about this person, like, I feel about this person more than I feel about my friends. It's just like, kind of like, it's like different.
Yeah.
Where I want the dynamic to be different with them in a way that I'm, like, fully satisfied with my friends, right? So it's not like I actually innately feel differently towards men and women in any other like context in my, well, I mean, obviously, like, you can't really affect the like gendered aspects of society, but like you know, like, there really is nothing to suggest that I should not be attracted to men in that sense, but it really is just the fact that like I'm much more attracted to the way that women perceive me than the way that men perceive me, or that I think they perceive me, right? Like so, you know, where I'll be like, I want a woman to perceive me in like this specific way. I do not want men to perceive me in that way. Stop perceiving.
Yeah. I think for me, it's well. Here's the thing. I hate thinking about how people perceive me because because I look in the mirror and I go, ugh. But
wait,
like,
can I tell you a fun story?
yes,
This is going to be a flex. So on the topic of being perceived, since most of us are not being particularly perceived by many people at the current time, yesterday I was in a supermarket. And, you know, I only dress for the people in the supermarket nowadays.
yes.
And a random dude in the supermarket told me he thought I had a good style.
Oh.
I'm like, this has happened several days ago. I'm still riding that high. I'm like, I dress for you. You are the audience that I dress for.
You gotta take it. Much. Yeah. 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 So, wow.
Sorry,
I wish.
Still riding the high.
No, that's understandable. You keep riding that high and you take it with you for like a month or however long it'll last.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, for me it's more just like, I don't know, I find just being in a queer relationship to be so much more interesting and compelling. Like, I don't know if it's because like I just kind of like, because I grew up, you know, in a society where like heterosexual relationships are like just the norm, where I feel like I want to not be a part of the norm because that feels boring and bland to me. But for me, it's just like, I definitely would much rather, like, I mean, obviously, I mean, currently, right now, as I stand, I would be fucking, like, anxious as hell, but, like, I would much rather, like, walk down a busy street, like, holding a guy's hand than a girl's hand, just because, like, to me, in my brain, it would make me feel more special. Not, and that's not saying like if I was in a relationship with a girl that I wouldn't feel that way, because I would. But like just the idea, because as a single person right now, I would much rather have the other one.
Well, yeah, because a relationship isn't just like the sum of its parts, like any relationship, right? It's really the dynamic that it creates. And you could be really attracted to like the individual person, not necessarily in like a romantic or a sexual way. You could be really like, you could love them very deeply, you could feel about them very deeply. You don't necessarily want to create a new dynamic with them, right? Like it doesn't necessarily say anything about you or the other person. While with some people it's like you might think they're awesome and you want to create a dynamic in which like you are in a different type of relationship.
Yeah, it really truly depends on the person. I think that's something that not a lot of straight people understand. It's like, it's not that because here's a lot of straight people, like if they're like disgusted or they're like worried about you being gay, it's like, dude, I don't want that with you, trust me. It's exactly. Like, it depends on the person, seriously.
No, the idea that like I honestly, I admire the confidence where they're like, like, you know, where they're like, oh, you're gay, like you're attracted to me, right? Like, wow, like, you know, like the just like that assumption is
It's like, you know, I might have been before, but not anymore. So I also want to ask you, how's your interest in lexicography influenced you and your views?
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about lexicography at any time, especially because it never comes up in conversation. I always So lexicography, for those of you who don't know, is dictionary writing. So a lexicographer is like somebody who writes or edits a dictionary. And I honestly, oh, you know what? I actually do remember when I became interested in it. So when I was in like 5th grade, I got my first email. Actually, is that true? I think we had. I'm not sure. I feel like we had like school emails, but maybe I got my first personal email. I don't know. Anyway, and what I did was I subscribed to the Merriam-Webster and then
Mhm.
later the Oxford English Dictionary's Word of the Day feature, and
Mhm.
now I have like 400 unread emails from them. But so they would just like send out emails every single day that was like a new word. And
Mhm.
nowadays I read the email and I instantly forget it. So I've kind of stopped checking them.
Uh-huh.
And especially because it's, on the email I made in 5th grade. So it has like I don't use it for basically anything else because like it doesn't
Mhm.
have like a good name to be communicating with professionally.
Yeah.
So yeah, so nowadays I just forget everything. But back in the day, like, when you're a child and your memory is just like good,
Oh yeah.
I wish that was me, but yeah, I would just remember all the words. And one of the things so it was useful is the point. One of the things that Merriam-Webster also does is a thing called like Ask the Editor, which is just a video series where they explain things about words.
Mhm.
And I was super into that. Like I would cite those videos all the time in arguments with like my teachers,
Mhm.
in part because the dictionary is a descriptivist institution, and what this
Yeah.
means is that prescriptivism is the idea that there are certain set of rules that you should follow, and I'm using this right now in the context of language, but I guess you could use it in other contexts as well. But so like you have to say things like this. You have to pronounce things
Mhm.
this way. You have to spell things this way. You have to use grammar this way. You can't end a sentence with a preposition, even though everybody does that,
Yeah.
because it's incorrect. While descriptivism is the idea that you describe how language is. People use language in this way, therefore it is correct.
Mhm.
And so a lot of their videos would just be like, actually, you can say things like this. Actually, you can use words like this. Whenever a teacher would like say something about that, I'd be like, actually, according to Emily Brewster from Merriam-Webster. But yeah, so I honestly I feel like I got into lexicography first as a fangirl, which is like it was really not an intellectual pursuit. It was probably like what it probably was. It was probably a series of girl crushes on all of the female lexicographers. But at some point, this is my fun fact that I always say in fun fact go arounds is that I
Uh-huh.
collect dictionaries. I really don't remember what started this, but my Snapchat memories has a photo of like just me with or just like a stack of several dictionaries that I bought.
Mhm.
So I guess that was the first time around. I don't know what prompted it.
Huh.
Um,
I used to have a collection of encyclopedias because my
did you
neighbor
actually?
I yeah, because my neighbor a long time gave them to me and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool."
I mean, it's cool to like. Granted, like the internet has kind of like it like you don't really need necessarily to have physical books anymore to
Yeah.
like, have access to knowledge. But I
Mhm.
like feeling like I'm surrounded by knowledge. That like
Yeah.
everywhere. Like my room is pretty small and it's like very filled up with dictionaries. So
Yeah.
like, and I love that. Like it's a good vibe.
Yeah,
That
I hate not having like books that I read like in a physical copy. Like if I don't have a physical copy of a book, I will not and cannot read it.
I like. I will enjoy a book. Like I will enjoy the context of a book as much on Kindle or whatever. I
Mhm.
don't. I'm just e-reader. As I will in physical form. But like like the smell of a book, the physical feel of a book,
Yes.
it is like it's its own physical experience.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of like the same as like eating food. Like
Yeah.
for example, like if you're I don't know, like if you're hungry and you eat something that like you're not particularly like is not a food that you like you'll still feel sated,
Mhm.
but there's just like the added experience of if it was a food that you did like.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like reading a physical book is like. I'm one of those people who just like goes around smelling books. But yeah, my brother always makes fun of me for it, but like everybody does that. So yes, I am a fan of the books aesthetic, and
Mhm.
Russian immigrants are also like notorious for being like, we immigrated to this country with nothing but a whisk, $17 and 1,500 books. And it's like,
Yeah.
how did you afford to bring those over? um, or they'll be like, yeah, our, cause, additionally, like, I don't know, I'm not sure like how well known this is outside of like Soviet circles, but like the houses were really small and like the
Mhm.
apartments were really small. They'd be like, yeah, like I spent my childhood in a 1 bedroom apartment that was me, my sister, my parents, both of their sets of grandparents and 1,500 books. And
Yeah.
like what? Like and it'd be like, yeah, like we had like like I just stepped on top of the book stack, like the baby just slept in a pot, like we simply did not have space because all the books were like taking up half the space. So it's like I kind of feel guilty about it because I feel like very materialist, but also like sometimes you just have to enjoy life's pleasures,
Yes, I 100% agree with you. I have a bookshelf in my room which is not big enough for all the books that I have, so they're just kind of like crammed in there.
Yeah, I just like keep figuring like I'm like, what in my room can I use as a bookshelf? And I'll
Uh-huh.
like I've started like taking old shoe boxes and like putting them on top of the shelf so I can have like two layers so I can actually like, but anyway, yeah, it's yeah, I'm a big fan of fitting things into the spaces that I want them to fit into, so to say. But speaking of, let me see if I can make this segue. Speaking of fitting things into boxes, definitions like in dictionaries.
Wow. Great segue. I applaud you.
So as I mentioned, the dictionaries, and when I say the dictionary, I kind of mean like the general like institution of modern lexicography, or like the general like amount, like the thought around it is very much descriptivist. It's supposed like it, the dictionary will, it's not going to include misspellings if they're not common, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they do what goes into a dictionary like Merriam-Webster or like the Oxford English Dictionary is words that appear in edited text. So they need to be like attributed, so they can't, like, for example, do you remember when Trump called a bunch of countries shitholes?
Yeah.
A lot of publications actually printed it uncensored. And lexicographers were like super excited about that because they couldn't use they wouldn't have been able to use or censored the censored form of that word, even though we all know what word was being said, but because that's like not how it works, I guess. But yeah, so all this to say about edited text is that obviously people who are editing the text will probably be prescriptivists. So like it's not that it's not like anything that anybody says could end up in the dictionary. Like, there is like a certain standard that they are describing, but they are describing it. They are not creating the standard. This was not always true. Like both Noah Webster, who originally wrote the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and like Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first English language dictionary, like that's not true at all, by the way. I don't know why people say that about him. It's like, it's fully not true, and yet people are like, yes, he's the first English language lexicographer. No. That honor, by the way, goes to Robert Caudry, who wrote the Table Alphabetical, and I have an edition of that, and it's pretty short. And the person who wrote the foreword notes that he has two different spellings of the same word on the first page. So, like, it wasn't always it used to be like a thing that was done by individual people rather than teams. And like, for example, Samuel Johnson's dictionary, it's clearly just like his own personal opinions. Like, it's just like he treats it like his diary. He's like, dear diary, like, my job is boring. Like, he defines lexicographer as harmless drudge. And he's like, who I hate? The Scots. And then he defines oats as a grain that in England is generally given to the people, to the horses, but in Scotland is generally given to people. Like, oh, wow. Clearly they're just his personal opinions, and he's like, he's just like putting them on there, and it's really entertaining to read.
That sounds great.
Feel free to like cut as much of this out as you need for length, because this is no longer relevant.
This is going to be the world's first ever podcast about dictionaries.
It is. It will not.
Oh, I'm sure.
But, yeah, but who before has made the connection between geisha and dictionary? Surely we were the first.
Yes.
At some point, this interest in lexicography and dictionaries as like an abstract thing manifested into like a desire to like actually work as a lexicographer. And like, this is kind of difficult to do as a profession because like fundamentally, like, first of all, a lot of people like are kind of lexicographers for life. Like, it has like, it's difficult to like, it doesn't have the same kind of like turnover as a lot of professions do. And also it's becoming like increasingly tight strings budget. So whenever somebody retires, they just don't fill their position. You know, back in the day, you could kind of just like go walk into Merriam-Webster and be like, hey, you know, like I have a bachelor's degree, like I'm really into the English language, and they'd be like, yeah, like sure. But so a friend and I, who this friend just like miraculously shares the interest in dictionaries. You know, this is the first American friend who showed up.
Oh, it all comes full circle.
Yes. But yeah, and he's awesome. Like I love him so much. He's a very cool dude. And like we were both so uncool. And, like we were very uncool. One of my first memories of him is he like, so somebody it was during recess. And somebody like got a ball into a puddle or like a large bud thing. And you know, I'm saying that we were uncool. It was really just me. If you listen to all, we were really cool. Because yeah, so and they like the recess supervisor teacher was like, "Yo, somebody needs to get it." And I was like, "No, I don't want to get it. Like it's in the mud." And he jumped into the mud to get it, and I was like, "Wow." I was like, "That's cool." After that, we became friends.
If it makes you feel any better, I used to spend my recess spinning in circles and chasing after butterflies. So I was not one of the cool kids, needless to say.
So I would I would read during recess, and I like you know, I was above my grade reading level, and I really knew it. Like
Yeah.
I really knew it. Like I would read my books with like the cover up as opposed to like down on my lap because I wanted people to see the cover of the book I was reading. And you know, so whenever teacher would be like, "Wow, Masha, like you're like reading like this, you know, advanced book," and I'd be like, "Oh, this is just my midnight reading. This is just like
oh, this little thing."
Yeah, no, I was like this. I really like. You know what my gender is? My gender is pretentious intellectual. It needs to stop. Like, and that's also like the Russian Jewish identity. Really, it's just pretentious intellectual. Like that's what I have in common with other Russian Jews. Is literally just that. I mean, and you know, there's like a historical reason for it, but I do not exist in that historical context. So this really is just a choice that I make.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, anyway, so from splashing in the mud, we came all the way to being lexicographers, by which I mean that we now, so in 2017, we were like, yo, you know how we're like gay? And you know how we're interested in dictionaries? What if we did those both at the same time? We were like, wow, big brain as hell. So we opened a Google Doc, and we called it Gay Dictionary. And then we just wrote down all the gay words we could think of. And like, I don't know, it was like 2 pages. So nowadays it is like 90 pages. Like 95% of the words are just undefined. It's just like, just a list of words. But we have like a source list. That like both like a list of sources that we still need to look at and a list of sources that we've had. And we kind of started like basically just like there's an LGBT section of Wikipedia that you can look at the articles in it, and like this is a really helpful feature because if you go to the bottom of a Wikipedia page, sometimes it'll have like, oh, see also. So you can just follow those chains until you like run out basically. And so that would be really helpful because we just go into Wikipedia and like write down the words, and then like later we could search for like more quote unquote reliable sources.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, they also have sources at the bottom of the Wikipedia. Like it really, like we really need to. After this is done, everybody go donate $3 to Wikipedia. I'm gonna do it too because like it is a great resource. The point is that we sort of started accumulating these words, and that's still what we're doing. Like it's been, so as I said, we started it in like summer of 2017, and it's really not close to done. Partially because we're working on it slowly, but partially because there's just so much out there. Like, and it's been a really, I think, productive process for us both personally.
I'm sure you learn a lot.
Yeah, you really do, because like basically everything that I've said today about gender and sexuality, like I don't think I said it a single source. So,
that's fine. We don't need sources here.
In my mind, the like sources that I was thinking of are very largely like ones that I like are probably like 90% sources that I came across because of like research for the gay dictionary. The working title we have for, you know, how it will look like when it's complete is Encyclopedic Dictionary of Gender and Sexuality, but you know, it is the gay dictionary. And yeah, our hope is to like basically like put this out online and make it fully public, like and maybe it could have some cool features as well as like kind of like in Wikipedia where you could like it recommends other articles to you. Like maybe we could have like a thing where it sort of like recommends other words to you, so you can like find, you know, words that like relate to, I don't know, lesbian culture in the 1950s, or like words that relate to gender identity in South Asia type of thing. So yeah, that would be cool.
When this gets uploaded, or if it ever gets like published, I'm going to need you to send me a copy.
You know, hopefully one day it'll happen. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's slow going. Like, first of all, because obviously it's not like our full-time job.
Yeah.
Like, aforementioned Samuel Johnson, he was, so first of all, he was really into the fact that he was better than the French. Like, and he was very actively used as propaganda by like certain portions of English society. Like somebody might know about him. That's Johnson well armed, like a, oh god, maybe I don't remember this as well as I think I do. Johnson well armed as a hero of yore has beat 40 Frenchmen and will beat 40 more. And what he was referring to was that Samuel Johnson compiled his dictionary in 8 years while the Frenchmen, it took them 40 years. It took 40 of them 40 years to compile a dictionary of French. And Samuel Johnson was literally sitting out doing the calculations. He was like, how much better is an Englishman than a Frenchman according to, you know, dictionary speed? But yeah, so the point is it took him 8 years. Like, it's not a, like, and he was, I mean, I don't really, like, you know, like, they just, like, that's what they did, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, if you were an aristocratic man, you just sat down and wrote your dictionary. But, like, so the point is that it takes a long time. And obviously, like, there are less words about sexuality than there are words in the English language.
Yeah.
So, you know, it might not take, like, it probably wouldn't take the same amount of, like, hours of labor. But, like, you know, but a lot of these words are, like we'll have words that are, like, genders from different cultures.
Yeah.
Like, we had to think pretty, like, in detail about what we wanted to include and what we didn't want to include. So, like, for example, like, a lot of the times, like, on Tumblr, you'll see, like, a bunch, or, like, in various social medias, Tumblr is just kind of the most stereotypical one. You'll see people, like, quote-unquote creating new genders, you know? Like, and we kind of have to think about, like, okay, like, how, you know, popular does a gender have to be?
Yeah.
And, you know, so one of the things that we've come up with is that, like, if we see, like a significant enough group, which, like, is a very unscientific amount, identifying with it, we'll include it. But if we see that not a lot of people are identifying with it, but a lot of people are, like, submitting asks that are like, hey, I feel this way. Is there a word for that? And if we see, like, tons of those asks, then we'll include it. And similarly, we're like, okay, like, if there's a gender or sexual role in another culture that isn't, like, directly equivalent to, like, lesbian, for example, like, we won't just be including, like, translations of the word lesbian. Like, for example, in Russian, it's lesbianka. Like, it's the same word. There's no reason to include it again. But if it's, like, clearly a different enough social role, then we'll include that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we kind of, like, think about, like, how will this be of use to the people who use it? But so, and I went off on that tangent for a reason. I forget what it was, though. My point was that, so, like, you know, when we're, like, sometimes we have to do research to figure out, like, whether these words are actually worth including or not. Like, right now, I think we probably have, like maybe 30 or 40 words that will end up being cut from the final thing once we kind of do some research on them and are like, you know what, like, this is not useful enough. And words like lesbian, obviously, like, we kind of know what that means. But nevertheless, like, it has a really interesting history. It didn't always mean what it meant today. Originally meant, like, mannish women, basically. Like, anybody who was, like, gender non-conforming as a woman was considered a lesbian. And then it specifically referred to women who are attracted to, or, like, who are in relationships with women. And then today it means, like, a sexuality of a woman who is exclusively attracted to women. So even words like that require, like, a pretty decent amount of research to give like a full picture story about them. But like words that are from cultures that we have no familiarity with, like obviously like require kind of a lot of research too. And my hope is that like eventually like once it's out, people will actually use it, and people who identify with those identities will leave critiques. They'll be like, or like they'll at least leave like testimonials type of thing, so you can like see, because like we're both like white Jews from the same city. Like like it's we have a pretty limited scope of knowledge or like cultural instinct, because like it's kind of like this, like it doesn't matter how like big brained we are, like we're big brained in the exact same society, So we really need people with big brains from other societies. Yeah, I mean that's a really fun project, and it's like it's going to take like a long time to finish. But in the meantime, like I am learning a lot, and like I love it when someone's like, oh, I feel this way, and I'm like, let me turn to page 35. I'm like, I have a list of words for you about that. Or I'm like, I just read an article about this. But yeah, so it's a very fun thing to be working on.
Yeah, it sounds really great.
Yeah, it's also changed my because I in the beginning I was like, what is lesbian, what is gender, what is sexuality, what is attraction? Because I'll be like, oh, like let me just go define this word, like this is easy, this is a basic word, like what is attraction? And then I'm like, what is attraction?
Yes.
So now I'm like, wait, like I think I feel this way, but like, do I? Like I feel like I've like so many of the assumptions I came into it like the instinctive assumptions where I'm like, oh yeah, this is what gender is, this is what attraction is. When I've actually been faced with like the need to like define it, or faced with more information where I'm like, oh, in order to like define gender, let's take a look at like genders from other cultures. In order to define sexuality, let's take a look at like sexualities throughout history. I've really had to think like to actually think about these things in a way that like, even if you're just like day-to-day identifying with them, like a lot of people might, but you sort of can go much more on instinct. Which is which is completely fine. Like that's how most people do it, and that's, as I said before, like gender and sexuality are really not rational things. They're not things that can really be measured and tested, and but when even trying to think about what even are they, can we prove that they exist at all? It's like it is an interesting thought experiment, but it's also like I think it's been productive for me in trying to understand my own identity. When thinking about like let's break it down to the very basic building blocks. What is actually there, and what is the vocabulary of our society that I've applied onto my experiences that might not actually be as accurate as I want them to be.
Yeah, I wish I kind of had more of that experience, and I feel like I should definitely like try to involve myself more in things like that. But
read gay shit, man. That's
yeah, I get. Yeah, you are 100% right. I will do your homework, which, as you said, is read gay shit.
Yes. I want to report on gay shit on my desk next Monday.
Oh no, not next Monday. It's too few time. I'm gonna procrastinate until at least Sunday night.
Yeah.
So at the end of the podcast, I always ask the other person, are there any questions that you have for me? It can be anything. It can be philosophical, whatever. Or is there anything that you would like to say to the audience at all?
Well, I already said to the audience to donate to Wikipedia. Realistically, like, public knowledge is very important. In terms of resources as well, look on LibGen, guys. If anybody does not know, I forget what the domain like it's not a .com, it's libgen.is maybe. LibGen, like library genesis, LibGen, and you can get PDFs of like a bunch of free things on it. Yeah, so that's like a very large portion of my resources come from that. When I'm like, oh, I wish I could read this book, but I don't have it and the library doesn't have it, LibGen has it. It's excellent. So I would like to say that to the audience. Contribute to public knowledge, guys. You like when I was like figuring out stuff about myself, like a lot of stuff that was most helpful wasn't actually like academic text, but like people on Twitter being like, I feel like this. Like I feel like I saw a Tumblr post that was like, what, gay is my gender. And I was like, wait, I feel that way. Like, and it was probably like a shit post. So the point is that like your knowledge, your like wisdom is notable and it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
So definitely don't be afraid to put that information out there, even if you're like not sure about it. Like it could be helpful for feedback. It could also be helpful to like for you to look back on, to be sort of like, oh, how did I feel at this point in time? Like realistically, like ask questions and find information.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already talked for a really long time, and I would definitely love to talk to you more, but I don't want to ask you like 700 questions and then you're going to be here until like 5 p.m. I guess the truth is I don't really have like a necessarily question that I really do have, but because I mean, yeah, like I feel like being queer really is just like a process of questions. So asking one question is difficult. Living the queer experience is like, it really is just like living a bunch of questions, and they might not have answers, but it's like, from very like small level questions to like, what would society look like without a gender binary? Like you can live that question.
Yeah.
And your lived experience of living the question is the answer. And that's my like random platitude of the day.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Masha. I really appreciate you coming out to talk to me and to do this podcast episode with me. Again, as I said, you're always free to come back for another episode. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I really like, I do appreciate when people, show an interest in my interests. And so, thank you for asking me about dictionaries and shit.
Oh, but of course.
So yeah, thank you very much. Stay gay.
I will stay gay. That is a promise I can make. And thank you to all of the viewers listening. I appreciate all of you tuning in. The show's gotten a lot of support, and I just want to thank all of you. And for now, this has been the Kinda Queer Podcast, hosted by a couple of kinda queer folks. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, everyone. And you see how I said that it was a gradual process like 7 times? You can edit out like 6 of those times.
No, it's fine. The fun thing is I also include like little clips at the end of like the YouTube video where it's just like little outtakes. So that'll probably get in there.
Okay. But that doesn't necessarily... Oh my god. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I have like this little stuffed dinosaur, and I forgot that it...